and I would like to welcome you all to the final Zoom presentation from the Manitowish Waters Historical Society for the winter. And we've done two other Zoom presentations, and this is the final in our installment. And we've made it a habit of trying to do a virtual pontoon tour to get everybody geared up for summer. So today we're going to be exploring Clear, Fawn, and Stone Lakes. And I think we have some new research that you'll find pretty exciting. This will be the last of these Zoom presentations until December, but you can catch us again at the Manitowish Waters Athletic Club on May 31st, where I will be doing a pretty interesting presentation on moonshining in the North Woods. It was popular in Rhinelander back in January, and I think you'll enjoy it, to be sure, when we do it at that time. If a friend of yours didn't get on tonight, or if you sometimes have to be pulled away from the screen, please be aware that this entire presentation is going to be put online for you on our YouTube channel. And with that being said, and all housekeeping being done, I would like to start the presentation. So here we go on our virtual pontoon tour. We're starting on Clear Lake, up on the north end of the lake. And as you take a look at it, we have shots here from a 1918 magazine that is in the Manitowish Waters Historical Society collection. And this is from Outers Magazine. And it shows Clear Mud, which is Fawn Lake, and Stone Lake over here, and a gentleman with a vest, a bow tie, and a historic fishing boat. It's an interesting look that you don't see very often here in Manitowish Waters today. We'll be using several articles and journals from folks who have donated their collections to us. They're online. And matter of fact, you can link into these things. We have an 1899 Forest and Stream story of Pete Vance and Joe Levine. And we have that 1918 primary document on Outers Magazine. They're all in podcasts. You can just go to our YouTube channel, or you can go to our podcast channel right here, either way, and you can pick up and take a look at those and other entries that I'll be noting throughout the presentation. So in 1847, as we go way back in time, this map illustrates from the Norwood and Owen expedition how, I have to omit some people, I apologize, how we are surrounded by Indian communities. The blue arrows illustrate here the Turtle Portage Band, which is Mercer. This blue arrow, Lac de Flambeau, this is the trading post, and this is Camp Red Arrow on Trout Lake, the Trout Lake Band. These two red dots here are on Manitowish Lake, and they require I'm still logging people in, by the way. How about that? And we see that Clear Lake is going to have a strong indigenous influence as well. All right. So again, you would see wigwams such as these, gardens planted, and Ojibwe and other indigenous communities living there for thousands of years. One of the things that really drew indigenous communities to the area is wild rice. And with the construction of dams, the logging dams starting around here in 1888, 1889, wild rice crops were wiped out. So places like Big Lake and Rice Creek, which were a little bit higher and less influenced by the dam, became key cultural sites. Of the first pioneers who came to the area in the 1870s to 1880s, you had trappers, down here at the bottom. Timber cruisers here on the right, marking timber to be later cut down, and then loggers to drive the logs downstream. During that time, one of the first families, if not the first family in Manitowish Waters, was the Devine family. And Dan Devine was a trapper. He, I'm getting some feedback, so if people could mute themselves, that would be great. All right. All right, I'm gonna have to get out of this. You take yours in the other room. All right. All right. So Dan Devine and Kate Devine came to Manitowish Waters probably around 1870 to 1881. Here's the Devine family. Here's Kate Devine. She is an Ojibwe from Lac de Flambeau. Here is her husband after Dan Devine. And this is the Perkin family. And that's how we have this nice photograph here. The Devine family came here early on. This map from Mark Leistico, recently passed away historian from Manitowish Waters. And it shows Dan Devine right here on Island Lake in one of his different encampments. Also in 1878, we see the image here of Dole Lake, or Lake Dole, as it says. This is one of the first in-depth surveys of the entire chain. And oftentimes it's said that people mocked Dan Devine because he was a Civil War veteran. He was wounded in the Civil War and received a pension. So they thought he was on the dole. And that's an interesting mark at that point. But the Devines came here early on, and they actually opened a trading post at Kerner's Resort, which is right across from Gurr's Pier and near the Blue Bayou. He would travel to Wausau or Fifield to get goods to be sold in this area. And here's an example from 1937 of where Devine's first trading camp would have been. Later on, another trading camp was here on Russ Lake, run by the Devines, called an Indian Camp in Outers Magazine. And the Devines ran that. Only one son was left because the rest were in Europe fighting in World War I. One of the key things about routes in the area and Clear Lake, Big Lake, and Island Lake was a triangle that was often used by guides. Guides actually preferred fishing and taking these portages, and we'll be going over those and the location of the portages as well to get clients the best possible fishing. The Devine cabin on the left is a small, probably outpost cabin. And here you see the Devine homestead on the right, on the north side of Clear Lake. And the Devines ran a resort here and out camps. And it was really quite a large and sprawling property. We actually have an 1895 article showing the Devines on Clear Lake. And here's the only picture we have of Dan Devine and three of his children. It's a sketch. And these are the men who came and actually were fishing with him on Clear Lake. Dan Devine's tombstone is still on that property. It's a classic Civil War tombstone. This is an image of his sons, okay? And he had 7 sons and 2 daughters. The 2 daughters, Mary and Lizzie, were not photographed, and they were all raised there with his wife, Kate. And in 1909, when the railroad finally pushed through to Russ Lake, but certainly to Buswell, you can see the Devine Resort is clearly marked, ushering in a new way to get to Clear Lake. And it's kind of interesting that some citizens back then were making disparaging remarks. A few visitors, we get those in early journals about the Devines and their Ojibwe heritage. But in the truth, when you read from the Manitowish Waters Oneida Vilas County history, it said that all 6 of their boys who were of age volunteered for World War I. The 7th tried to enlist, but they rejected him, and he ran that Indian camp then in 1918 on Russ Lake. So if you look at the Devines property, here it is all cleared out in 1937, And this would be run by Mary Devine or Mary Haskins at that time. And interestingly, this is right on the border of Manitowish Waters, right here, Winchester, Presque Isle, and Boulder Junction. So it could be said, as one of the earliest residents, the Devines were the first residents of those townships with this homestead. So that really makes understanding the Devine influence really cool on Clear Lake. Here's Paul Devine on Rest Lake guiding, and in a classic guide boat with the wooden chairs in it. You can see the mark across the top in X's. These are the Indian camps that the Devines ran. And also John Devine, who will later be the constable in Manitowish Waters, guided Roy Case to, he's the father of modern bow hunting for deer. And Case took a fork or buck with John Devine around Big Lake, starting archery deer hunting for deer in the state of Wisconsin. Sadly, the Devine family was struck by tragedy again when Dan Devine Jr., not Sr., was out on Highway K talking to a friend on the side of the road who was in a car, and he was shot underneath his arm, and it was a lethal shot, and he died. Dan Devine Jr. was considered to be one of the finest guides in the area. Outdoor enthusiasts from the cities often came to see the adventure of the North Woods, and they quickly hopped on those railroads to get here and find the best areas to go. That 1899 journal that I talked about in the beginning of the podcast, you can see that they talk about Devine and his land, and which he has cleared, and that he is married to Pat. They mess up the names in here, but this is certainly the Devine family. In 1897, he was bringing parties in and from the dam and moving them all the way to Presque Isle and Clear Lakes. And the Chicago Northwestern Railroad to the south went into Winchester, but then the Milwaukee Road came in through Boulder Junction and brought access. In both cases, whether they're coming from Manitowish or from Boulder Junction, visitors would come on these buckboards and then come into the boats of the Devines and be taken to their resort. And here's a picture of Papoose Junction. This is right at the point where Papoose Lake Road and County K come together. And you can see the Papoose Junction stop right there. And these are the different stops in the area, whether it's Rice Creek, Big Lake. This was the route to that area. Later, Tom Haskins married Mary Devine, and they ran the resort here. Here's some examples of them harvesting wild rice in the 1960s on Big Lake again. So as we move a little bit further off the Devine property, which is groundbreaking in the area, we come to Sky Lodge. Sky Lodge was started in 1946. It was an American planned resort, and it was really quite amazing. There's actually 20 rooms in this big resort right here. This is kind of the resort era in the post World War II boom of tourism. And sadly, in 1953, in May, it caught on fire. But in testimony to the great first responders at Manitowish Waters and the Mercer Ranger Station, probably on patrol on fire watch in May, they were able to save all but 3 rooms of the property, and that it had to be rebuilt and ultimately was sold in 1954. Now, if you go a little bit down the lake, as you see where the red arrow is, this is where these portages were that were used in the time of Dan Devine, the indigenous communities, particularly the Ojibwe, and there are several portages that come out of Clear Lake. Clear Lake is actually a hub, and it's all part of this triangle, as I said before, of where guides like to be. And here from an 1895 map from the Buck family, you can see that portage being very clearly. And then the 1900 buck map, you can see the portage there, the portage up to Papoose Lake. And then again, here we have another map that shows it from Clear Lake a little bit north to Big Lake. I can't tell you how in the early days, Manitowish Waters stretched from Trout Lake up into Round Lake, down into Big Lake. And this was the Manitowish Waters. It was a much bigger area than the chain of lakes we think of today. Well, on our pontoon tour now, we're going to cruise down to the Rentelman's property. They started in 1941. They have an amazing journal, which is podcasts for you to listen to. And you can find more out there. But they bought this beautiful property on the eastern shore of the lake, and fishing was absolutely exciting. Here's the location of their cottage. You can see the wood stove and the knotty pine interior. That was a classic in the North Woods. And in those journals, there are stories about them encountering with wild animals, their relationship with the Devine family, where a lot of the information I shared came from, and also the story that we'll get to a little bit later about during a thunderstorm, they had a knock at the door and a large Ojibwe Indian was there, and he was known as Chief Dakota. They brought him in to get him and his clients out of a thunderstorm, and they had just a great time getting to know one another. So please tune into that and learn more about that. Now, as we move past the Riddlemans and we go down the shoreline, there's on the point here, just coming down into Clear Lake, there's Camp Manitowish YMCA. And if you go on Vilas County GIS and go to property ownership and just type in Camp Manitowish, you'll find about a dozen of these all across Vilas County, up from up in Land O'Lakes to Winchester to Boulder Junction, Lac de Flambeau. And Camp Manitowish actually has 2 lots here and on Island Lake. And these were purchased by the camp early on, not much long after they started in 1919. So they'd have camping spots, and that's still used. And Camp Manitowish still uses that portage into Clear Lake. That's kind of fun. Another thing you could do right here where the state land hits Camp Manitowish, you can find one of these meanderline survey pipes. They're the classic steel pipes with the brass caps with the coordinates incised on that. There'd be another one over here on the Galloway's property, or any time a section line strikes a body of water. Those are kind of fun things to look for. Sometimes there's witness trees there as well. Another really unique story of Manitowish Waters comes from Quo Vadis, which means where are you going in Latin. And you might say, why would they be using Latin? Well, it was owned in joint shares between 3 Catholic priests who created a retreat there and built it out with lovely cabins. And it was for rest, reflection, and collaboration and developing their faith. Since there was no Catholic Church when they began in 1928, they would actually hold Mass out there, and they would rotate who was giving Mass throughout the summer. And then when the Catholic Church was built in Manitowish Waters, they stopped that practice. But Quo Vadis is really a cool property today. Some of the original buildings you can see from the shoreline, and they actually use the name of the boathouse right along Clear Lake Road there as you move toward the channel exiting the area. Later, it was operated by Thad Rutza, and it was a very popular and beautiful resort in the area. Now we're going to take you a little bit far afield here and get you to just up on Clear Lake Road to the store, the Clear Lake Grocery, started by Leah Losby in 1957. Here you see the Clear Lake Grocery Store in its operation. It was really a signature for folks on that side of the chain. And across from this would be a poultry farm that we'll talk about a little bit later. Later, the Ogles will take ownership of the property, and they will run it until 1968. Here you can see the Ogles smiling and waving. But what is really kind of interesting to me is that you could get 5 acres and 500 feet of frontage on Clear Lake in 1968. I think that'd be a pretty attractive real estate deal for folks today. As I said, right across from that intersection between Highway K and Clear Lake Road, where the Clear Lake Grocery was also the Clear Lake Poultry Ranch and Grocery. And this was run by Gordon Hunick, and the buildings and outbuildings are still there today. And that's kind of an interesting development. Here's a very exciting family that isn't really talked about enough, and that is the Doriot family. They came here early on as pioneers. It was kind of a father and son team of Calvin and Charles Doriot. Charles is to the left, the older son, but they left Marathon County, as many of our early pioneers did here in the Manitowish Waters area, and they moved to Manitowish, where Doriot bought some land there and ran a number of businesses and was the postmaster of Manitowish and alike. But what this family did, I think, better than any other that I'm aware of, is they bought, and to use a modern term, they flipped properties, and they followed all the procedure, and they were savvy business persons. If you take a look, this is Big Lake. This is what's today Keith Island. The Doriots own this. Here's the Doriot Resort here. This is the Badger Estate and the Wells Estate and others over here. And they would sell those, and ultimately they would buy the island that is in Stone Lake, and also a property on Mud Lake or Fawn Lake. But in the end, they take over and really modernize Deer Park Lodge, and they move and continue to buy up and do value-added exchanges. Let's follow that through. So starting back here in Manitowish, these are 1903 and 1912. Here's Calvin Doriot, the dad, who's buying land, and they're running their businesses in Manitowish, but they're doing far more, as I just explained. Up here in this area, Charles Doriot, this is the son this time, is building a summer resort on Mud Lake, and he runs a stage line from Manitowish, and then he has a launch and creates what will ultimately become Waukegan Lodge. Notice they also have property here on Stone Lake, the Stone Lake Island on this side of Stone Lake, so they're moving property pretty fast. And Doriot's Fawn Lake Resort continues with the Waukegan Lodge. It was the DeWoody's Waukegan Lodge at this point, and it was a very popular destination. As you move into the channel going to Clear Lake, it is in the bay to the far right with the great looking marina. And then later it becomes another famous resort, Mall's Timber Lodge Resort. As we continue down the shore of Fawn Lake, for a lake that has a lot of state land and only about half or less is developed, we found out from the owners there that there was the location of a logging camp. Now, I've known about this logging camp a long time because great Manitowish Waters historian Michael Dunn had pointed out that the last logging camp about 1914 was actually on Fawn Lake. So what occurs, and it would look something like this cabin. This is not a picture of that one, but it would be representative of one of those in the area. So when construction of a garage took place, they started to put in the foundation for a slab, and they found all this memorabilia. You can see more of this that we have archived in our Past Perfect collection. And we recorded that. We're looking to record that in the state Index for Archaeological Sites. and protect that. And we worked with that landowner. So now that we're through that logging camp and now we're back to the Dorians. They're not done by a long shot. So here in 1908, not too long after they came here, they started to develop the island. The first one's developed on Stone Lake. Take a look at these cottages. We're going to refer back to them with these really neat porches as well. All right, so they run that for a while. And it was a rough and tumble time in Manitowish Waters. And I'm not going to read this whole story to you, but it's an excerpt from John Lefebvre's book. He is one of the sons of Abe Lefebvre on Island Lake. And he talked about a brawl that took place at a Dorian speakeasy, which was behind the dance floor out on the island. And only men were allowed into this at this time. And what occurs is that Louis Laporte was being teased by George Devine about a girl. And Louis Laporte was known to have a temper and some other problems. And he hauled off and sucker punched George Devine under the chin when George took a sip of beer. And George Devine did a somersault backwards, came up, and then hit Louis. And what happens is an hour-long brawl out of the building, across the shore, into the lake. They ripped much of the clothes off of each other. They were almost exhausted, the blows they were taking, and no one intervened. At the end, George's brother was so concerned that he ran down to his fishing boat, to his tackle box, to get, what those guides kept in the tackle box, a pistol, because he thought his brother was going to die. But the two men finally stopped, and no other action was necessary from George Devine. But this gives you a little insight with detail of the kind of bar rooms and brawls that were occurring. And the island was a point of sanctuary. Matter of fact, this is a hot spot to go that the Dorians had, and it led to another tragedy. In 1915, the bridge that now crosses Manitowish and Spider Lake was first built, and they had to bring a crew down. And this crew one Sunday was going from Buck's Resort Tavern, because they've been working hard putting the cement floor in on the bridge rather, and moving along. And then they got the great idea to get in a boat and try to go to Dorian's bar on Stone Lake. Well, they never made it. They did not continue their drinking spree. They tipped over and they drowned. So there's another tragedy on Stone Lake. So after the Cedar Resort, it was then bought by Gus Kerner, a brother of the Kerner Resort. After that, it was called Cedar Lodge Resort. This was run by A.C. Hunger in Manitowish Waters. Here you see it again. Beautiful cabins. And then ultimately, it moves into the ownership of Maud Belter. And she started that property. She bought that property in 1932 and planted a lot of the pine trees that are out on the property. So the island has this bell right here, which is famous. You ring the bell, and then a launch would come over and pick you up. That is, if they liked you. They kind of had an idea who was coming and when, and they would be tipped off. And sometimes the launch wouldn't come and get you, and sometimes you'd be left on the island. These are all stories that come from that. She opened in 1932 after purchasing it in 31, and ran a bar during Prohibition for a while. The bar was run by Maud Belter until 1949, when Maud's daughter Mitzi married Ed Beaumont, and then it became known as Beaumont's Island. So it stayed within the family. And in doing so, the Beaumonts were very much into music. and they also had a lively bar scene there, and it was really a place of great celebration. And what would occur is that folks would get a drink here, or maybe come with a drink, and they take the launch back and forth. I have scuba dived from here to here, and there's a big deep hole right here, and all along that are empty bottles that have been discarded during this period from the Doriots all the way through the Beaumont ownership of the property. But there were also some hijinks that would go on out in the island as well. There's the Belter's Island, and the advertisements in one of our early Chamber of Commerce booklets you can get online under the Commerce tab or our webpage. And here's a classic image of Beaumont's Island itself, or Belter's Island, or Doriots, or any one of the number of owners. But it really is a classic island. So a lot of music was played there. Both Mitzi and Ed were musicians, and they also had a gag that they would play on rookies who would come out to the island. And what they had is they would have like a little hole aside from the piano that new people would come and you would be coaxed to look in there, and somebody's on the other side of the wall with a stuffed fox. And the idea is you put your head in there and the fox jumps out. It terrifies you, and everybody gets a good laugh. So it's that kind of chicanery and merriment and good times that abounded on Beaumont's Island. Now, just for a moment, I came across this Rand McNally promotion for Manitowish Waters. Remember, I asked you to look at the cabins that when the Doriots owned it. These look very similar, don't they? And this is the image that they sketched in the Rand McNally promotion that we see to the left. And that could be Lefebvre's Island or Beaumont's Island, certainly, but it is a neat flourish of Manitowish Waters history that's still a little bit of a mystery. So the songs that were sung there led to, again, a great deal of merriment. And we'll see that one of the greatest outcomes is this cultural flourish, a song called My Sweet Little Miss at Manitowish. I'm not going to sing it for you, but I will attempt to read it as a poem, and I think you'll find it kind of interesting. All right, so this is Beaumont's Island, really, when it's written. I've got a sweet little miss at Manitowish, Wisconsin, with golden hair and blue eyes, blue as the sky. When the moonlight shines on those northern pines, she'll be waiting there for me. Oh, that island of bliss, I'll steal a little kiss that will send me in ecstasy. We'll find romance galore on the shores of Beaumont's Island. I'm in love, so in love with my sweet little chickadee. I'll take her into my arms with all of her charms and her beauty and love for me. Gee, but I miss my sweet little miss at Manitowish, at Manitowish. Kind of an interesting little jingle and cultural flourish here from our town. Well, we're still moving around Stone Lake, and we've covered a lot already. And now we're on the Williamson Resort, started in 1936. You can see the yellow arrow in the bottom, kind of keeping you all acclimated here on where we're going on this pontoon tour. And the Williamsons were both Peter and Charles Williamson. They were from Chicago. They only came here in the summer, and they ran this resort, and it was an impressive resort. It had 8 cottages, but they were very much into the rugged lifestyle. They stayed away from indoor plumbing, so you'd have an outhouse, and brochures would recommend that you would use the lake if you wanted to use a bath, to have a bath. But in any case, they were quite popular, and they were up on the high terrace, as you can see. Williamson's did a lot of promotions, and we have a lot of postcard shots. Now we're looking up from the lake. Now we're back looking up from the lake at the whole area along the terrace where all the cabins are, the marina. Now we have the road coming in, and here we have what I like to call bear on a string. They would go out and bait bear clearly, and this was all part of the attractions. We have seen this with other chamber books, other resorts. They made people not bring dogs because they brought wildlife right in up close and personal for visits to our town. All right. Well, when the Williamsons were done in 1956, Pudgy and Evelyn Peterson bought the property. And here you see the property looking at the beach area, and there's the Petersons. And they ran it for until 1973. They shared a lot of images of fish and things like that, but I wanted to point out the gentleman right here, as it's marked in the red arrow. This is Chief Dakota and his wife, all right? Chief Bazso Dakota is an important individual. He was in Odana, Ojibwe. He also had relationships with the Oneida down around Green Bay, but he was Ojibwe, and they misspell his name here. But here he is a Spider Lake guide for 40 years, spending most of his time at Voss's. This might be Manitowish Waters of the Turtle Flowage, but here's a picture of him provided by Ruth Gardner, speaking of Voss's, in Look magazine, which was a super popular magazine. And I even remember that as a child. And he was actually featured within that. So that is a great connection for Manitowish Waters, and certainly for the Peterson Resort. In 1973, the Petersons' daughter, Annette Tellefson, took over 3 of the cabins and ran Lorewood on Stone Lake. And they reduced the cabins you see here from Williamson's, and then had and still have those cabins operating and are run by Annette's daughters, Diette and Renee. So the tradition continues even to today. Here's a little mystery I decided to throw into the middle of our pontoon journey. This is from the man himself, George Laporte, the guy you see when you go into Triggs and Manitowish Waters, standing in front of the grocery store. That was his business, but there's also a great picture of 2 muskies, one in each hand, that we use often for promotion. And then George said, I'm probably the only one knows how Stone Lake got its name. There used to be a great single rock in the lake, about 9 or 10 feet in diameter. It was one of my favorite fishing spots. Today, there's about 6 feet of water over the rock, but I can tell you exactly where it is, even though the last time I saw it was in 1911 when the dam drained down. That was during the River Drive logging period, where they would drain the dam's water level to 0. We hold the water level at 5.5 feet in the winter. So take 5.5 feet of what we have out there right now, and that'll give you an idea. It was one of his favorite fishing spots. Well, I've gone around and looked, and I'm not saying that I am absolutely correct, but you see this yellow arrow here? There is a bump out here right before a really big deep hole. And on top of that, there are a couple of big boulders that I see on my radar, or sonar rather, when I go over it. And I invite all of you to go out and maybe try to locate where that stone is. I'm thinking that's it, unless somebody has a better idea, which I really believe is possible. Please tell us at the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. I do it before the weeds come up. It's much easier to discern. Speaking of other stories that are kind of strange about Stone Lake, I was doing a lot of research with Kay Crons. I'm doing research on moonshine, as I said at the beginning. And in doing so, I came across a pretty nasty extortion scheme. and that was run by a thug named Stoshi and his counterpart. And they were using it against Billy Goudreau, who was running Billy's Bar up in Mercer, which had some mob-like connection with guys like Ralph Capone. At any rate, this Stochi guy gets caught in Rhinelander. His buddy gets shot in a joint police effort to stop this extortion ring. Stochi himself would have died, but the machine gun jammed on the Eyre County officer, and he survived. So a lot of media attention went into this. And as we dug in deep, we find out this Stochi character was staying at the summer home of a Hurley woman on Stone Lake in the Manitowish territory. So there's another mystery for us to think about. This is another criminality connection of the Manitowish Waters area. So we'll be researching that more and more. Moving to our regular residents and great traditions, the Barber Green Cabin that is right at the outlet of the Manitowish River out of Stone Lake, coming into the lake itself and that big bay to the north and west, was run by Harry Barber, the president of the Barber Green Company that made asphalt and had paving materials. I've had the honor to be in this cabin and the cabin that is next to it, and it is absolutely quintessential old Northwoods construction. Back in the day, they only had access by boat. They had kerosene lamps, kerosene stoves. Their milk came from Plunkett's farm, and they still today enjoy the property, and it's shared among the family and other families like the Kaltofens and Frank DiLenardi, our president of Manitowish Waters. They reside in that bay because they imprinted so much of the property. And that's a story of many families here in Manitowish Waters as well. As we look at the pictures that they've shared for us, these are the shorelines along Clear Lake. You can see how they're a little bit lower, the kind of stumps and roots that happened when the dam was going up and down in the log driving era, and this left an incredible structure as well. It's interesting that employees from Barber Green could actually stay in a separate cottage and actually go out there and be on the lake as well. I think that is an interesting and altruistic element of the Barber Green story. But fishing was king. One of their favorite fishing guides is here on the right, Mr. Buxus, I think it is, up in the right-hand corner. But here you see just a classic shore lunch on the other side right here, with the fish fillets, the potatoes, the bowl here, the coffee, down here, the beans and alike. And this is a classic Northwood celebration that people just still treasure today. And here's a picture of Harry Barber. And I'll tell you what, I wish I could get in that boat with him and enjoy some of the fishing back in that day as well. He has his chair bolted into the seat, as many of the guides did. They take the legs off, of course. And then he not only rows, but he has one of those small gas engines, which probably saves on the back a little bit. Well, the Barber Green property was caretaken by a guy named Bill Strandberg, who is really an interesting character. He actually was a dropout from Princeton University. He was charged with cheating. And when he was exonerated from that charge, he refused to go back. And he spent some time in Hurley at a newspaper, and then came down here and became a really exciting fixture in the community. So much so he got his name on a map like a resort back in 1914. That's a difficult thing to do. He held several positions in town, That's Lac de Flambeau and Spider Lake. He worked as a guide. As I said, he was a caretaker. He was a great conservation advocate and was on the Conservation Commission in 1924 for the entire state of Wisconsin, focusing on muskie management. He shot himself by accident in 1917, trying to get out of his boat with some clients as he was going to shoot a big snake with his pistol, and he shot himself, but it was just a minor wound, if there is such a thing. And he was also a deputy sheriff in Vilas County and was involved in the big raid on Big Lake against Powers and was part of the Powers posse. And you can look up that YouTube video that Kay Crons did on our YouTube channel if you want to learn more. So if we move just a little bit down the river, you can see it marked up here where George Bazso's property is. And these buildings, many of them still have that signature style that George Bazso delivered. George Bazso is a young man here. I knew him as an older gentleman sitting on this pier, shaking his fist at people making a wake. He was an expert muskie fisherman. It can sometimes be seen out there with a suic, which is a floating, low-running muskie lure with 3 or more big treble hooks, and he would fling them at boats, and because he didn't like people going fast in front of his pier. But really, he came here early on. He was a friend of Emil Winetka's. He was hired to be a mechanic. He operated within a garage. He was also a bartender. He was involved in the Dillinger shootout. And he also ran the Tower Bar for a while. But he ran this resort for 50 years. And today that is condoed off, and it's a very special place for folks. One of the things that's kind of interesting here is you see under here, it says mosquito controlled. This is from the 1950s. That's code for using DDT. We don't do that anymore, and the Eagles appreciate it. George Bazso, right here, young guy, his legacy got in the newspapers a lot. 3 hours on Manitowish Lake. They saw 10 muskies up close. Bazso landed 2 of them. The men lost 1 apiece and brought in 1 undersized one. But he was certainly a storied guide and personality in Manitowish Waters, home of the tiger muskie. Not many people really tout that distinction anymore, but it used to be on bumper stickers and in all of our literature. Just moving down a little bit further, we come to the Michaelis property. They got 3 more years of resort operation on the river there. And right here in this Narrows, just Bazso's right over here, just down here in the Narrows, between the 2 big bays on the what's often called the Rest Lake Channel, the Birch Bay cabins were first started by Ernie and Judy Michaelis in 1948. They bought 48 acres. Again, you know, savvy land use and purchasing and development. Their sons Michael and Bud helped them run the cabins, and they were a standard. They have a great beach there and a lot of current that you're going to find out about real soon. Later, Jackie and Mike Michaelis took over the business, and they are still on the property today. And it's another great generational resort Manitowish Waters story. But here's a little something to add to the story. So being the map nerd that I am, we have a great map at Kohler Library, and it actually shows from 1878. Remember that first map that I showed you, Lake Dole? Well, they measured in 1878 the rise between every lake and marked a rapids of 1.5 feet right here. And this is the view of Michaelis's Birch Bay Resort, and it would be just to the left of that in the river. Right where it narrows, that actually becomes a swift when the water is lowered. And so it's kind of neat to connect the original watershed and watershed behavior with a modern image. Well, as we come to a close here, we see we have another gangster story. This one was uncovered by Kay Kranz. I give her all the credit. So Kay was doing, her investigations into gangsters and so on, and it finds out that Leon Gleckman, the Al Capone of St. Paul, went from St. Paul in a kidnapping to Hurley again, yes, and then here to the Russ Lake Dam, and was moved down to this part of the channel and was held hostage for 4 days. Gleckman was in prison previous to that, and he was called the brains of the Twin City alcohol rings. We're still doing ongoing research, but it's very clear that this is a St. Paul kidnapping on Russ Lake and was held prisoner in a Hurley man's cottage in October of 1931. Kay's research actually is leaning her to consider the possibility this kidnapping was sponsored actually by the Chicago outfit and the likes of Al Capone to drive the St. Paul influence in northern Wisconsin out of the area. Again, that will be something you'll hear from Kay not too long from now as we process our research and gather more collections. So that's the end of this pontoon tour. It took us about 50 minutes. I appreciate your patience as I allowed people to come in during the presentation. Be sure to consult this Zoom presentation on the Manitowish Waters YouTube channel. I'll have it up in a day or two. It'll enrich your pontoon boating experiences, and I think you might even want to become one of the subscribers in our YouTube channel. We have 286 subscribers right now, so think about that. And I'm going to stop my screen sharing right now and unmute myself if I can for the 41 people who are here. That didn't unmute you. So if you want to talk, maybe you can unmute yourself. You can press the space bar and forward your questions to me. How does that sound?
Jim?
Yes.
Oh, Bob Austin here.
Hi, Bob.
I hope, someday you and Kay and myself and my family can sit down and we can talk about the Austin cabin across from Bazso's. So,
well, that'd be great.
We've got almost 100 years on that old cabin. It's still standing, and be nice to have that taken care of and put on your tour. So,
well, we would love to do that. And again, and what we would do, and this is really helpful for anybody who's like Bob, and he and I have talked often about his property and their traditions here. We'll do a video interview and put you on our YouTube channel, and then that's out there for people to access forever. And we can actually integrate images with that, just as I did here. And then we're aware of it, and then we're able to share it in presentations like this. This won't be the last presentation of this kind. And we really appreciate community members and visitors like yourself sharing stories, pictures, artifacts, and the like. So really, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Anybody else with questions or observations? Well, that sounds like silence to me.
I have a question.
Oh, please go forward.
So you've spoken a lot about the people that lived in the area, and you shared a little bit about the Indian influence, but can you just shed a little bit more light on what types of Indians were there? Where did they live in the area? Was Lac de Flambeau still around?
Oh yeah, well, Lac de Flambeau is still around today, and it's quite vibrant. That's a great question. I appreciate that question. So that's a whole presentation, but I will give you the thumbnail sketch. So if we go back all the way to the earliest indigenous communities that we know, like scholars call them Paleo Indians, as the glaciers receded from 10,000, let's say, to 8,000 years ago. Paleo Indians were living in nomadic bands and fighting and killing megafauna. We have sites like that in Manitowish waters that are very, very strong. So I go into depth here from the earliest times in Wisconsin recorded history of human activities and indigenous activities. There's a strong representation. And I invite you to come to a presentation, and I will do one where we can talk about the archaic traditions, the woodland traditions, the Oneota traditions, and then into the historic traditions with the Ojibwe, ultimately, who are powerful within this area. And we actually had Ojibwe chiefs from Lac du Flambeau with several residents on Rest Lake. But we also had the Ojibwe, for instance, like Chief Dakota, the Devine family. I think I did 30 slides on them and alike. So I could go on for more than an hour, and I would be happy to do so. But I would direct you to some of the YouTubes that I have out there that really cover all of this pretty well, and our webpage. And you can contact me at jimkb@aol.com, or you can reach out to us at our email, which is at our website. It's mwhistory.org, and I'll get you set up. How's that?
Wow, that's fantastic. Thanks so much. So
Yeah,
informative. This has been wonderful.
Oh, great. Thank you. Any other questions?
Did you have any information on the Volkman family? They were owners of the Quo Vadis Resort prior to my grandparents.
Okay, well, I didn't. And that's why it's great to do this, Bob, because we get more information and pictures, and it makes for a better presentation, and we archive them. So I know that Kay and I both do that pontoon tour, and we would like to let that go. Did I do okay on the Quo Vadis?
Yes. Yeah,
Oh,
I wasn't aware of the 1928 start date. I
Oh,
knew
okay.
I knew the priests were somehow involved with it earlier than that, but was not aware of when the Volkmans started the resort.
All righty. Well, good. Anything you want to share, man, we would really be thrilled to have that. And then likewise, for those of you who may be new, Manitowish Waters Historical Society, we share everything for free online. That includes all of our archives and images. Barb Bartling does an amazing job of getting those out there and explore those collections. And the more we get out there, the more we preserve history for future generations. And people like Bob and Bob Austin who want to share, I mean, that's our bread and butter. So thank you again. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Well, we're coming up on 8 o'clock. The sun is setting over Alder Lake, and it is absolutely stunning. I can almost see over the snowdrifts from my metal roof that it deposited. And I hope you all have a great evening. I thank you for joining us for our final Zoom. And just again, we are going to have several events, and look for them at our website, mwhistory.org, under the events calendar. We have the Pioneers of Historic Preservation in early June, and we have the May 31st Moonshine presentation at the MAC, and those are always a big hit. So take care and have a great evening.